Friends, welcome in to another edition of Deportes Nation. Today, broadcasting live, actually, the Soccer Podcast, the Soccer Tejas Soccer Podcast. As you can see on screen, I'm Alex Parra. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you. Thanks for joining us, or hopefully you'll be joining us shortly. Beside me, you can see him. There he is over here, the one and only Don Victor Araiza. First of all, Victor, if you can hear me, happy day. How are you? Great to talk to you. How are you?
Good, Alex. Always a pleasure to be on here and talking about the beautiful game as we always do.
So, Victor, today we're kind of experimenting a little bit by going live. In what we've done in the past is we've pre-recorded the Soccer Tejas podcast. Today we're live, I'm being told, on our Soccer Tejas YouTube and also on our Deportes Nation Facebook. So, Victor, hopefully people will be able to interact, to kind of ask a couple of questions if they want and give us their take, their comment on all of this coverage of the beautiful game in the state of Texas. Victor, why don't we start with maybe the purpose of the podcast? I know that we're into our third episode, if you will, and some people may be joining us for the first time, but there's a lot of coverage. There's a lot of the sport of soccer in our state. The state has it at the international level with the World Cup coming, with international friendlies, with international matches between not only clubs, but also national teams, certainly at the professional level with 3 MLS teams in the state, 1 NWSL team, 1 USL Premier League. Someone's going to have to help me with the USL, the Dallas Trinity team. Then we talk about all the countless different division NCAA college programs. Then you talk about the youth level, the semi-professional level. When we came up with this concept, Victor, it really was about how can we try to kind of condense this into maybe bite-sized pieces. But there's a lot of our sport. There's a lot of soccer in the state of Texas.
Everything's bigger in Texas, like they say, for a reason. Texas could be its own country.
Sure.
And in many cases, we can, like you said, across all levels, I'm sure any team in Texas could go up against, if it was Texas against the United States, they could probably field together a pretty decent team at every level. So, like you mentioned, I think it's to talk about all these things, put the focus a little bit more on the Lone Star State. It is an important time with 3 MLS teams, like you mentioned now, 2 women's pro teams in 2 different first division leagues, not to mention sprinkled in there across the college level, youth level, any corner of the game in the United States, Texas has a piece of it, and each city obviously has its own history as well. And by the way, the U.S. national team, both the men and women, are about to play here in our Texas capital. So that just kind of goes to show you where Texas is on the national stage too.
It's definitely a lot to take on. I think one of our commitments, Victor, when we're covering the sport, is a balance between friendly coverage, and what I mean by that is we care about the sport so much that relative to other sports, Victor, it gets lost sometimes, and we'll talk about that shortly when it comes to the Houston market, for example, is having friendly coverage, positive coverage, but also objective coverage. As objective as a human being can be. I think the media has lost what journalism means, Victor. Journalism to me, sports journalism to me, means asking questions, asking fair questions, hopefully asking educated questions, and then having the response be whatever the response is from the different entities. You and I, Laura, and others have debated how many softballs should we throw at a given team organization? Should we be the group, the person, the people that ask tough questions, demanding, et cetera, et cetera? I think there's a balance there, Victor, and our commitment is that every day we're going to analyze how to better act, how to better ask questions, but also I think we're at the point in time with our sport where tough questions are necessary of organizations, of teams, of players, regardless of gender, regardless of ability. I think people now know the sport well enough so that we can demand that. Is that fair?
Absolutely, it's fair, and I think it's also the type of coverage that's going to take the sport to the next level here in Texas. I think it really has been missing, and I think you can look at most teams, most levels. Why are the teams in Texas not competing for the top championships? We can dive in each and every one of those, and there'll be a long conversation. But I think it's a needed one, and it's not going to happen anywhere else, unfortunately, because, like you said, for one, it's there are a lot of softballs out there because nobody wants to be rude or intrude on any, or step over anybody's toes. But at the same time, I think there's also a misconception of what journalism is and what criticism is. It's not necessarily being mean for the sake of being mean, or just because you have something to say where you don't agree with the way things are going, that you're automatically, the number one hater or against everything that's going on. I'll give you an example. A few months back, Rodolfo Borrell was doing a press conference up in Austin, the general manager of Austin FC, sporting director, however you want to. I forget his title. I'm sorry. I should know it, but for the sake of, it's GM, sporting director, basically. One of his quotes in that conference was saying, "Well, it's because as media, you don't support the team." And I'll do a better job of grabbing it for, we can go deeper in conversation of grabbing the exact quote. But I mentioned this one, and it's not to single him out, but because I've heard it from different levels, right? And we've heard it in Mexico and with the national team. And again, we can go in different levels. But I do think that is a misconception. Media doesn't exist to do PR for a team, right? Or for a league or for any. It's to be the communicator, the messenger between the fan base and the clubs. And if there's a message that's not being represented correctly, I think that's why we're there, first and foremost, to inform, to be that connector. I know with social media that's sort of been, the lines have been blurred a little bit, right? It's one of those where you can go direct to the source at times, but are you going to get always a transparent answer? Or, I think that's kind of where the criticism comes in a little bit, or at least the analysis from media outlets.
Look, Victor, you have hit the nail on the head about what roles should be, have been, the agenda that people have or don't have. Look, I go back to I believe our current political environment, our political culture, that everybody has an agenda, conservative, liberal, moderate. Everyone has an agenda, including the so-called journalists that are out there with coverage. This certainly applies to the sport. And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, Victor, on this. And by the way, Victor, help me out. If anyone on Facebook is chiming in, please let me know. I know we're coming on unannounced, but you're better at following this. So let me know if there's any Facebook comments and or questions. But it's great to see all of you that are joining us on this live edition of the Soccer Podcast. Victor, you and I know, and we've lived with this with Spanish language coverage of sports, that often coverage is based on, well, I'm going to give you a pass for you to come in to the stadium, for you to have the media meal, and that's what gets you in. There's very little vetting, and this applies to all the professional teams that I've worked with in Houston, Victor. Right. And the favors that are made, and the wink about, hey, I'm going to let you in, I'm going to give you the meal, I'm not going to hassle you about who you are, about where your coverage is going, but if you do get something out there, make sure it's positive. And I understand the organizations want positive coverage. Who doesn't want positive coverage, right? And it's at times sad to see that we can't really sustain objective coverage, which means sometimes you are critical. Sometimes there are great stories. Sometimes there's not so great stories, Victor. And we walk that fine line in our role, I believe, as sports journalists, of bridging the gap, like you said, between fans and between teams and organizations. There's so much out there, so many stories that have not been covered. I'm going to say this because the teams don't want you to cover it. And you, as a sports journalist, ask yourself, well, listen, is it worth it? Is it worth me potentially losing my place in line with this organization to be critical when maybe I shouldn't be? So, Victor, it's something we struggle with every day. And we could potentially point to certain stories that have been going on in the different sports. And they're just simply not covered. They're covered up. I'm going to use that term. And then, Victor, how many times have we seen journalists, quote unquote journalists, who really aren't getting access, having access for certain teams? So it's a balance, and we're hoping that at the end of the day, who's going to be the judge of this? You, right? The fans. You, the consumers of all of this media, of all of this content. Victor, I think you alluded to something that's the reality today. With social media, the lines of who's a journalist or not are completely blurred. An influencer could be someone that has not that it's necessary, any journalistic training or experience, and boom, they've made an impact. Why don't we get in good with them, says a team, so we can get coverage? It's about marketing as well.
Oh, it is. But I think, the bigger issue with that, and it's not, look, at the end of the day, like you said, it is marketing. If somebody has more viewership than others, it's only natural. If teams say, "Hey, I want to go with a certain outlet or not." I don't think that's an issue. I think, and look, for the most part, we also live in a country where I think we're granted media access. More so than soccer around the world.
Sure.
So I do think we are.
Point.
In a certain sense, we do have a little bit more protections here and have been privileged in that sense. But, like you said, sometimes it's certain values have been lost through the years, right? And it's not, because sometimes of the lack of media access, it's not, it's not journalists getting media access, right? So some of these, so back to the point of the softballs, that's part of the reason why that comes across. The other side is, like you said, sometimes when you try to ask for answers, you get a closed door. You don't get any additional information. And at certain points, you do get the runaround. And, but it's also up to you as a journalist to maybe go out and do the groundwork too.
Sure.
For transparency, I think what people have to know is that, more and more, because of social media or because of digital media, there is more of people pick what they want to hear. And that's what gets the most viewerships. That's what gets the most ad revenue, on and on and on, to where, the more serious journalism doesn't have maybe the most funding behind it.
Sure.
It is more of a hard road to pave. And then when you do, try to get some of those stories again, are you able to get the full story? Are you able to, devote the time needed to get the full story? These are all hurdles now in modern journalism, I think, that, more and more each day get tougher. And I think that's why this state of sports journalism, or I'll say soccer journalism in our country, is where it is. I don't think there's enough journalists that are asking, enough questions, suffice to say tough questions, but just, the nuances of the game. It has turned into a little bit more of PR, but, there's still some of us out there that try to do it the traditional way.
So, Victor, let's break that down a little bit into maybe digestible pieces. Let me ask you a couple of questions, and I think you know the answers. I know you know the answers. Let's take a major city like Houston, where you and I reside, where you and I have been very, very lucky, blessed to be part of the sports journalist world and coverage of major sports for many, many years, both English and in Spanish. Victor, the old school traditional coverage of sports, for instance, with the Houston Chronicle, was that major sports had a beat writer, a someone that would cover the beat. I know a wonderful journalist, Jonathan Fagan, with the Houston Chronicle. I think he's still doing the beat with the NBA and the Houston Rockets, probably going on 25 years or more, maybe 30. His beat literally is being with the team, traveling to every game, going to every practice, giving us the heartbeat of what's going on with that team. Relative to soccer, Victor, does the Chronicle currently have someone on the beat of the professional teams in this city, which are the Houston Dynamo and the Houston Dash? The answer to that question is they don't.
No, they don't. They don't, and certainly when they put somebody, it's not at that level. It's not day to day. A lot of times it changes throughout the years. From the beginning, it's either usually a freelancer or an intern. And it's not to say that you can't get good work out of a freelancer or an intern, but they're not putting the same time, like you said, that would be put into a normal beat, like the Rockets or the Texans or the Astros, or even high school sports.
So why is that? So take us again. Soccer Tejas, coverage of the world of soccer in our state. Breaking it down to Houston, why does the only major still daily, I don't want to call it a newspaper, but written sports journalists, I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you. You've been part of it. Why does the Chronicle not have the soccer beat? Is it because they can't sell it? Is it because they don't know it? Is it intentional that they are not interested in the sport? What do you think, sir? And again, I want people that are following us to come in, to chime in, give us their opinion. By the way, AB is watching, so AB, thank you for following us. Victor, I think you know where I'm going with the question, but for those that don't know it, probably never even asked themselves, why does the Chronicle have coverage every day of the Texans, every day of the Rockets, every day of the Astros, multiple journalists? And by the way, they didn't even give us the score of the Dash match. What's happening here?
Well, I think it's a combination of everything you just said. But I think if we want to get to the easiest answer would be money. They probably don't see the money in it. Whether that means because they're not interested enough to nurture the coverage and make it into something that could bring them ad revenue or more interest. I don't. That's where I wouldn't know the exact answer. You'd have to talk to whoever the editors are. You'd have to talk to at TV stations who the sports directors are, or who the people above them are, and they can give you their answer. But I think it all comes down to that. They obviously see a value in covering Major League Baseball and NBA. All the major sports in the United States, the NFL, where with Houston, in particular with soccer, even if the World Cup is coming, look, they're going to cover the World Cup because they see the money in it. Why don't they see the money in the local product? Could be the MLS. Could be they don't respect the level.
Sure.
Could be they don't see enough people in the stands.
So at the end of the day, it's not about objective journalism. It's about a money-making enterprise. And there's nothing wrong with that, Victor. And I think this is where people get lost in saying, well, the TV stations, you name Channel 13, Channel 11, Channel 2, Fox 26, their job is to create content that is sellable, that someone will pay for to be a part of. That's the business that we're in. Now, where I'm going with this, Victor, is at the end of the day, if the Chronicle doesn't have a full-time beat writer, if the channels that I mentioned aren't every day covering the Dash, the Dynamo, it's because they don't either see the potential the sport has, or they've made the decision, look, we've got to go in a different direction because this is not making us money. So when people complain about coverage, Victor, That's a factor without a doubt. How can that be cleaned up? How can that be fixed? Little by little, we see more coverage. Victor, we just saw Coach Ben Olsen write a letter to the public asking for coverage, asking for people to come to the stadium and support the Dynamo on their run to the playoffs, which, by the way, congratulations to Coach Olsen on second year consecutively getting to the playoffs. It's something to be proud of. Victor, the struggle is still to have that covered when you're up against the Texans. The Rocket season is starting. The Astros, although we know they didn't do anything in the postseason, were there again. Is it just out of sight, out of mind, Victor? For many of you, I'm sure that are watching, it's frustrating. There is no coverage. So then, Victor, you connect that with, okay, at least someone's caring for the sports, so we might as well give them some support. These are difficult times. I'm trying to wrap my head around how this would work, Victor, to better cover our sport.
Well, like you said, if it was, if there was an importance to the journalistic side of it, you would at least cover the basics, which I think, again, here and there we've seen him, cover games, write previews to games. But to your point, that's kind of where it starts and ends. There isn't anything further, maybe every now and then, but nothing consistent.
Right.
Right. Like you said, there's top writers that could write different features, and maybe they'll come. Maybe once they're in the playoffs, though, maybe you'll get some of those stories, but you don't get them throughout the entire year. Again, not to the level that you get, not even remotely close to anything you get with any of the other sports, or even lesser sports like high school, college, any of those.
But Victor, then I'm going to interrupt you, because then the reality becomes is there's very little coverage. There's very little knowledgeable coverage, and there certainly isn't objective coverage. It's, look, the station sent me here, point me, what's that guy's name? How many times have we heard, who's the player I should be talking to? This is reality, right. Victor. This is reality. They don't know the players. And I get that. I don't know every Astro player. I'm not day to day at Minute Maid covering Major League Baseball, and it's part of the beat. But
that's where you say, is there an editor that cares? Is there an editor that says, okay, if I don't have a soccer writer, let me find a freelance writer.
Right.
If there's not one in Houston, let me fly somebody in from somewhere else.
Sure.
If this is an important enough event to cover, what do we have to do to cover it? Right. This weekend, we're going to have, upwards of 50,000 people is what I'm hearing for Club America against Chivas at NRG Stadium. It may not be covered. I don't think it will, because it's, one, it's a friendly, but two, some of these games don't get that coverage.
Well, covered by whom? Certainly English language media. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't think the Chronicle's going to cover it.
That's what we've been focusing on. Sure.
Right. Well, so there you go. So the one big newspaper in town's probably not going to cover it. Maybe they'll write a story about it. The English language TV stations are probably not going to cover it. Maybe a channel or two.
What day is the match? On a Saturday?
That's right. Sunday.
On a Sunday. You think that's going to trump the NFL? Do you think that's going to trump American college football in the fall?
I think if they fill up that stadium, certainly upwards of 50,000 people, it's a notable event to at least mention it.
Sure. On
all of your Sunday special programming that basically every English channel does.
Most stations.
Sure. I think it merits at least a minute or half a minute or something, right? But you probably won't get any mention of it.
So we are, and by the way, friends, thanks to all of you that are joining us today, a special edition of the Soccer Tejas Podcast Live. Alex Parra beside me, Don Victor Araiza. I call him Don because he's older than me. No, he's not. He's much younger. Today, missing Laura Gomez.
I look older than you.
Victor, I'm looking at the monitor. I don't need to be looking at myself anymore. The toupee's falling off. You can't have enough spray tan. I just, we got to survive it. By the way, thanks to all of you that are joining us. And Victor, help me out if people have questions. Let's see. I don't even know what I'm on, but AB, thank you. Hector, thank you for being with us. Maria, Enrique, also, thanks for watching. We really do appreciate it. We're unannounced today. So if you have questions, comments, or just a shout out, let us know. We're kind of setting the plate about what our commitment to the Soccer Tejas brand is and what we're trying to accomplish. We've been talking about the lack of coverage, the lack of objective coverage, the lack of tough coverage. But I think it's more than just, hey, let's show up and for instance, ask Coach Ben Olsen why they went and lost against St. Louis 0-3 and what does that mean? There's so much more behind even getting to the point of the coverage, what the team expects, what we as so-called sports journalists, now this gentleman over here, he's a sports journalist. I'm just the guy that talks in being completely objective. He's put in his dues. He asked the questions. But also the question is, what do you expect, soccer fans? What do you expect from coverage, from our coverage, from coverage from the stations, from coverage from the print media, if that still exists, the online media? I think that's important. Let us know what you're thinking. How should soccer be covered in this state? And we're breaking it down today to Houston, again, because it's something we pretend to know a little bit about. That applies to the professional side. Victor, then we have the sensibility of, hey, the college side. I've been blessed to call Big 12 games, SEC games on the women's side. It's the level is fantastic, but there's no support. There's no coverage. You look at U of H. I was just at U of H versus Texas Tech. Tech, like TCU, like other universities, are normally having thousands of people. University of Texas, their stadium is fantastic in Austin. Thousands of people showing up. At U of H, if you can get 300 people, that's a lot of people. Houston's a strange city when it comes to our sport, Victor. What I think we are trying to do is talk about these stories. There's so many stories to be told, but nobody's telling them in English, in Spanish, in any language. That's part of the calculation when we took on the Soccer Tejas brand and commitment. So I guess the question is, what do you fans want to hear relative to the coverage of soccer? And Victor, you've been doing this for many, many years. What do fans want? Do fans want tough questions? Do fans just want scores? Do fans will take whatever we give them?
I think there's certainly different wants and needs. But I think the biggest one is fans want access. Fans want to be in the know. They want to be on top of what their team is doing. If you have something of value of information, what went on in training? Did somebody get injured? How signings coming up, right? Interesting stories. Again, things you get in each and every other sport, narratives leading up to a game. I think all of these things help fans get engaged, know the team a little bit more, know about the team a little bit more. And again, that's part of maybe what's missing. Maybe we've lacked also in bringing that to the fans. And I think it goes both ways. Sometimes it's I keep saying it's being the connector between both. How do the fans feel about the team? Getting their side of the story.
Right.
Sometimes, that's where media becomes important. Our fans liking the team, but maybe they don't like the way ticketing is handled, right? Or maybe they have some certain concerns about the team and they'd like somebody to ask, right? I think that's where we kind of come in as well. Could be the other way around. Our fans maybe being a little too hard on the team. We'll get the team's side of it to even it off. So, but again, keeping the conversation going. I don't know if there's enough about it. Even again, certainly in our big two cities, Houston and Dallas. If you go across, some of the other cities, I think you can dive into those as well. Even Austin, I don't know if I think there's more media coverage. I don't know if there's more in-depth media coverage as far as those same nuances that I just told you.
So when we try to compile our direction for Soccer Tejas, and friends, thanks to all you that are joining us here on this special live podcast. We wanted to go live because we wanted to hear from you, your comments, your questions about where we are with soccer coverage. not only at the professional level, not only at the college level, and we're going to talk soon about the youth level and the club level and even beyond. One of the calculations, Victor, at least in Houston and in most of the state of Texas, the state of Tejas, I'm going to say it that way, Victor, is that the mainstream media is no longer English. The highest rated news broadcasts in Houston are in Spanish. And you and I have lived the transition from a press conference handled 95% in English with, oh, by the way, we'll ask one or two questions in Spanish, to literally when a Spanish-speaking player is announced that a la Héctor Herrera, the majority of that press conference was in Spanish. That's a factor, Victor, for many English language outlets who feel left out. And I've had some people, some journalists come to me and ask, well, why am I here?
It's not just the outlets. It's also, I would say, the public. And that's where there's importance for that as well. There's the English side of the story that has to be, or that can be told. And in this case, could be the connecting piece, for a player like that, like Héctor Herrera, with the general public in Houston that doesn't speak Spanish. Or it could be the same way up the road in Austin with a Sebastian Drusi, who's the star of Austin FC. Or it could be the same up in FC Dallas with Iyarramendi or any one of those players that maybe they express themselves better in Spanish. And if you have, again, a translator, since in a journalist, to be able to tell you their words, because when I translate, I try to do it almost, with the same meaning of what they're saying, not just Google Translate.
A literal translation, yeah.
Right, but sometimes there's little quirks between languages that,
sure,
where that they get lost in translation, and I think that's part of communicating the correct message. And again, I think all of this is an important piece of journalism, of covering it. So it's not just, I don't think it's just the one language. And I know it's the two dominating languages in this city. Houston's an international city where I think, even more could be done, right, to connect with the other languages in the city that maybe don't get that same representation either.
I just wish we had good sports journalists, not people like Enrique Vasquez, who's awful. Oh, by the way, Enrique Vasquez is watching us. Enrique Vasquez, we love you. You're amazing. You talk about a quality of someone like Enrique Vasquez, bilingual, bicultural. He knows his sports. And I'm going to tell this story for me, not for Enrique, or for other dear friends of mine that are in this business. I told this story years ago when I was with a professional team in town. And Enrique might get mad at me, and Adrian Chavarria might get mad at me. But Victor, this was the early 2000s. And we, as Spanish language, certainly weren't getting paid the money that the English language broadcasters were being paid. And often, or one time when I went to talk about, hey, maybe a little bit more, maybe enough to at least not have to lose money at the end of the year after gas, etc. The response was, well, you're only doing it in Spanish. And this is from a broadcast director, who, by the way, he's still in town. I won't mention names because that'll really get me in trouble. But the conversation went, I said, look, Sir, that's great, but you know that I can do their job in English, maybe not as well. I'm certainly not as seasoned as those broadcasters, but I can do that. Adrian Chavarria and I can do that. But you know what? Do you think they could do our job? And that set 20 years ago, a pattern of change that's come to our city, Victor. And I think the epitome of that is coverage for all the teams in Spanish, and how amazing people like Enrique Vasquez can cover in English and Spanish. They should be the face of the franchise. They should be the voice of the franchise. But they're not. And that's still something we've got to overcome. And in soccer coverage, it's even more critical. Look, I love Glenn Davis. I love what Glenn Davis has done for soccer in our city, our soccer in our state. He, to me, is a legend. Amazing person, well-balanced. Who is the face of the Houston Dynamo or Dash today, Victor, when it comes to coverage?
It's probably Glenn still.
Right? Probably Glenn still. I like the way you said that. But in the past, who has it been? Daniel Mejia, who's been doing Spanish.
Right.
But
well, yeah, certainly as
right?
a voice, as a radio, if you're talking about coverage, and Danny's done more lately also as well.
Cesar Procel,
you know,
Cesar currently
Cesar.
with the broadcast on 2DN, right?
Right. I think traditionally it's probably been up to maybe lately the newspaper writers, because again, that's the weight that the local newspaper carries. Even if somebody's freelance or somebody's doing it on the side, like I'll go back to more of the beginnings when Jose Jesus Ortiz was doing it. He was a baseball writer, but he was also doing the soccer coverage, and I think Corey Rapkin came a little bit. Yeah. Came a little bit after. Bernardo Fallas, I think, was there at the beginning.
Oh, that's a name. Bernardo, he's amazing, yeah.
And so I think, it's certainly with day-to-day coverage, those are the names that sort of come to mind. Like you mentioned, I would put probably both of them there because of the weight of their radio shows, Glenn in English and Cesar in Spanish. But again, that tells you where, I don't want to say the lack of coverage is, but there is still a lack of coverage because I'll just add with this. Cesar may have a daily show, but there's a limited time that, and I don't know if he goes that much deep into the Dynamo. I know he tries, but, and honestly, is it fair to give him as much as maybe Liga MX is going to get? Glenn, he's got a certain limit. It's not like he has a daily show, right? It's not like anybody on that ESPN station talks about the Dynamo during the day. That tells you where the coverage is as well. And we can go deeper into how much they fought to have their coverage. So I'm not certainly, trying to throw dirt on any of that. But again, that kind of goes to what we're talking about, where there isn't enough.
Right, but there isn't enough. And Victor, that's, I think, if you're a soccer fan in Houston, if you're a soccer fan in the state of Texas, you're just waiting. I don't want to use the word begging, but if there's any coverage at all, you feel grateful. It's almost like we as soccer fans have been neglected. Not almost, we have been. The coverage is just not there. The question we're asking ourselves, friends, is why? And me being around the sport of soccer since the 80s in Houston, I can't figure it out. Is it a lack of trying? Is it a lack of interest? Is it a lack of a market? There are hundreds of thousands of kids, Victor, that play the sport every day in this city. There are major clubs that are multi-million-dollar businesses in this city. I would think there's a market for this. And then what is our attendance for Houston Dash games? 5,000. Sellouts for the Dynamo this season? 1? Maybe?
I can't name one.
Maybe none. Someone certainly smarter than me can give us that.
Not for the Dynamo for number. Sure. I can't. Yeah.
So Victor,
I don't think they've had one in the last 2 years.
Is it because we're still dreaming that soccer should be major league when it really isn't? Are we deluding ourselves? Are we simply just not there? I think facts speak for themselves. Ratings. Now, I wish, for instance, the MLS doesn't help themselves with the lack of ratings from Apple TV, right? How do we know if that's successful or not? How do we know that it's growing? Having any data would be fantastic.
Yeah, but I think, you can see certain things with your eyes. Like you said, you can go around any part of the state. And really, honestly, since we're talking about this state, you can go any part of the state and you run across soccer fields. So I don't think there's a lack of interest in the sport. Again, I think, maybe the powers that be just don't have the knowledge of the sport enough to really make money out of the coverage from it. Because again, soccer coverage for the Chronicle or for any English language TV station or really any media outlet, it doesn't have to be limited to the Dynamo and Dash. I mean, we have a World Cup coming here in less than 2 years. There are soccer stories all around this city, right? What's the World Cup bid doing to grow the game? What's the legacy going to be of the World Cup in this city? We've heard none of that stuff.
Well, don't even get me started on the World Cup, Victor, because to me, and I'm going to be very direct, and I know someone's going to get mad at me. Victor, the World Cup isn't for the average soccer fan in Houston. It's a corporate event. That's the reality. So,
it's a Super Bowl, but people still watch football.
Still watch it. They're going to love it, but it could be played anywhere. Again, I'm being very cynical, and I know someone's going to say, Alex, don't be a Debbie Downer. We should be grateful. I am grateful. I'm very grateful.
The point I'm trying to make is we have the biggest event, maybe the biggest sporting event in the world. I wouldn't argue against it. Certainly of the sport. And that's not enough to garner soccer coverage in the city, Alex. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Well, Victor, certainly not on a regular basis. Certainly not on a regular
basis.
It
isn't, and we're less than 2 years.
It's sporadic. It's sporadic, and it's when it fits your agenda. I go back to that. And if you're just joining us, thank you for being with us on the special live broadcast of the Soccer Tejas podcast. Alex Parra, there you have Victor Araiza. Today we're missing Laura Gomez. Thanks to all of you that are with us, that are following us. I think we're live on YouTube. On the on the Soccer Tejas YouTube, and also on the Deportes Nation Facebook. So help me out, Victor, if there are questions or comments. We talked about the agenda. We were giving you a little bit of our foundation for the concept of Soccer Tejas. Of course, we love the sport. We want to cover the sport. We've asked ourselves, should we be objective? Should we be promoting only the sport versus asking hard questions? And Victor, I think this all fits people's agendas. The sport itself is continuing to grow at the youth level, continuing to improve on the field. At least I believe it is. At the end of the day, though, Victor, what can we do to continue to grow it? And often, I think this is a conversation we need to have in our family about what we can do better to promote the game, right? Certainly it's supporting. Certainly it's buying tickets. The World Cup is coming, and we'll debate that, trust me, on this show about who and why and who it benefits. But there still isn't enough support for the sport, even though it's growing. And certainly, I asked this earlier. You talked about Glenn Davis. Glenn Davis, to me, is an icon, is a legend, someone that is very knowledgeable of the sport at all levels. He's done it all. He is the face today, to me, of soccer in Houston. I can't name anybody else, Victor. And I can't name anybody else that's even interested in.
Well, there's different faces. I think that's the thing.
On the media side, if I need to be correct. But who?
Right. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, again, because Glenn has put in the work and the investment to put himself on the radio,
right, and then
use it as a platform to promote the sport. But maybe other people don't have the same means or aren't. I'm thinking about local league leaders, right, or people historically who have brought soccer events to Houston, promoters,
okay,
coaches. I think there's a lot of faces of the sport that, again, we're not getting to know because it doesn't go farther than that. When you get to the top levels, that's where I think U.S. soccer, and when you come down MLS, the NWSL, the local clubs, I think that's where there's a missed opportunity for those teams, those leagues, the federation, to be that great unifier and bring all the corners of the sport together. Because I think otherwise it's kind of like, pieces of a plate, right? And you don't get the full plate because there's nothing that brings it together. Certainly here in Houston, I think that's the case. And people can say, well, it's because this fan's not going to like that soccer, right? They're only a Mexican league fan, or they're only a Premier League fan,
Right.
or they're or they're automatically anti MLS. There's never, I'm probably
Consensus. Yeah.
rambling on here
Yeah.
now,
No, no,
but
no.
I'm saying, I think. And maybe that's where media could do a better job. Certainly, I think that's where the teams have an advantage because of where they stand in the sport to be able to be that unifier. And certainly fans, in numbers, I think we've seen some good fan bases across the league, and that's where you've seen these special environments, right? I don't see a reason why it can't be done in all parts of the country.
Victor, so we talk about our concept of Soccer Tejas, what we want to do, how we want to cover it, trying to be objective, also trying to be supportive of the sport. I don't think the sport will disappear, but certainly I think we need to be supportive of it. But now there are certain institutions, Victor, that I think either don't have the leadership, they don't have the courage, they don't have the knowledge to know that this is today and it's going to be the future. I genuinely believe this. One of those, Victor, is the University of Houston. And I'm proud to be able to broadcast games. But Victor, I've talked to several athletic directors over the last 2 decades about why the University of Houston doesn't have a men's soccer program. And the convoluted response that I receive is about Title IX? Is it about the budgets? It's about we can't do that. And if we do, something magical is going to happen that's going to prevent us from existing. By the way, universities are a business. We know now with NIL, we know now with the portals, it's business and athletes, to me, and Enrique Vasquez, if he's watching, we talked about this for decades, should be paid employees, period. Why show up for class? We're wasting each other's times. Pay him a salary. He is basically in the 2nd division of professional American football. If you're playing Div 1, he should be paid. Don't even pretend you're getting a good degree. If you want that in addition to your payment, perfect. No problem with that. There are 35-year-old men playing college football. There are 27-year-old men with kids and second jobs playing NCAA football. That's not the traditional way, and I'm going to get beat up about that too, of what the college experience was. By the way, it was, because it's changed. But how is it in Houston today that the University of Houston doesn't have a men's soccer program, Victor? It's low cost. You have an amazing talent pool right here, and you could make a splash with the community. Why do you think that isn't happening? And why has nobody asked a hard question at any of these press conferences? Ever, Victor, ever.
Well, because the media that's probably there isn't going to ask a soccer question because that's probably not on their mind, or it's not, maybe it's not a big issue with their public.
And Victor, am I being a drama queen? Am I exaggerating the need for this? Or is it just, yeah, he's one of those soccer guys?
Well, I mean, clearly they don't want to have a team. I think we should start there. And I think at a certain point you probably wonder, why is it that a university like Houston doesn't have one?
Right.
And may never have one now, just because of the way that soccer has gone in this country. The way that the men's development is, with the MLS development system. So we may, probably may see less college programs. I don't. Certainly with the draft going away in the women's game, we'll see how that affects it. But I mean, it's just a hassle, I think, for these athletic directors. They don't want to bother with it.
But you're exactly to the point, Victor, of where us, certainly me, in soccer coverage, and I think fans, they get to the point where they go, you know what? It's a hassle. Why ride the Chronicle? They're not going to cover soccer. Why worry about Channel 11, to name one, by the way, who are covering soccer more, covering soccer. They don't get it. The soccer fan in this city, and we know many, Victor, ultimately feel, I think, abused. And to the point where they say, you know what, man, this is my thing. I'm going to keep it small. We're not booming. We're not moving. I think that's my biggest frustration, Victor. The sport is not moving along, even with the World Cup that you mentioned. Because people that were not involved in the sport, that aren't involved in the sport, certainly are leading the charge of the sport in our city. I don't want to be critical. I can name names. But it's amazing to see the people that suddenly now are on the bandwagon. Why? I'm going to be very honest with you, Victor, because they're going to get passes to be at NRG Stadium, where the rest of us won't. I know that's critical. I know that's difficult. But Victor, you know who'll be up in those suites? The so-called organizers, who are basically counting the money.
People who have damaged the sport in the city, driven it to the ground.
That's the truth, Victor. And I know on Soccer Tejas, we're going to cover that. And we're going to talk about names. And we're going to ask those hard questions. Because it's not just kumbaya, Victor. And again, someone's going to say, Alex, you should be grateful that the World Cup is coming. Look what it's going to do for our city. I know there's an economic benefit. I know there's exposure. I know there'll be...
I'm still waiting for soccer fields to be built or whatever it was that was promised.
Victor, are we being too cynical? Are we being too negative? I don't want to fall into that trap. I love the sport and I love what it can do.
I think, again, to put it simply, I think journalism, I mean, you call it like it is. And, that's what I try to do. Certainly, I know not a lot of people are going to agree with me at times. But I think at the very least, people can look at my track record and say, well, okay, there might be something to this because I respect the time that he's put in, his sources, how he's covered the team. This isn't just some Yahoo yelling for the sake of yelling.
That's my job. That's my job, Victor.
There's something to this, or I may disagree with what he's saying, but if there's, he's got some type of a reputation, for not just doing it, basically talking out of his ass, right?
No, Victor, look, you put in the dues, Victor, and you're a voice for the sport, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
No, and where I'm getting at, I don't mean to cut you off, but I guess it's just where I'm trying to get at is, look, we could talk here about the beauty of the sport and what it can do, and again, what the World Cup could be, the positive side to that, because there is a positive side to that. There is also, a dark side to that as well. And there is a dark side to all these local clubs sometimes. And there's a dark side to, our local league and how it's maybe not being the best. And we could look at the dark side to high school sports. And are they, what purpose do they serve? And, is it just recreation or they, when you get to college, is it really, developing players, right? Or, is this, when are we going to, is it healthy to have so many games, with 2 games in 3 days or whatever, or, such a short season, such a condensed season, this backwards clock, all these little things that we can criticize. And I think that's part of the discussion. And I think that's also part of the passion of the sport that drives us to discuss all these things. Look, I try to break through the noise sometimes, only because I've lived this for so many years. I don't want to continue going on and seeing things just kind of stay idle, stay the same, and the sport not growing when there's so much opportunity here.
Agreed.
And that we can probably cut it off there. So
No. And look, that's why. And in today's edition of the Soccer Tejas podcast is precisely that, to talk about why we're at this point, or why we feel we need to start covering the sport more in this great state of Texas. Because there isn't sufficient coverage. Because there isn't objective coverage. Because there isn't bilingual coverage. Because there isn't coverage that at least acts like it has some knowledge and some history behind it. And as you look at my face, there's history and knowledge here because of my years. But I want the next generation, Victor, your generation, even the younger generation, to start treating the sport in a respectful way. And that doesn't mean just showing up and only covering one side of this, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think that applies to any topic you're wanting to cover. That applies to any subject you want to talk about, you want to explore, you want to know why, you want to know the behind the scenes story. And our culture today, Victor, in Houston, in Texas, is bilingual, is bicultural, is diverse. It is who we are. And I think the sport fits perfectly into where we are and where we're going. And now I think it's about not making people feel bad, Victor, but it's about the reality of, look, and look, there's a fight with sports. There's a competition. One day I see soccer, and I want to end on a good note here, Victor, taking over other sports in the state of Texas. And that means a change in culture. That means a change in the way things are looked at. What are we going through politically right now, Victor? A change in generations, a change in the way things were to the way things are going to be. And that can be a threat to many people, Victor. The simple fact, we talked about this earlier, that some press conferences are mainly in Spanish. That's leaving the so-called mainstream media out. And I feel it, I sense it. If I were on the other side of that, I'd feel it as well, Victor. But I think our job, Victor, in bridging the gap between the sport itself and the coverage and the fan is to ask the questions the fan wants to be asking, ask the questions that the fan is talking about, because I know that we as fans will do that. And also being objective, Victor, and the World Cup, I think, is a perfect example. It's not just going to be kumbaya. There's so many issues that are coming up because of this when it comes to mobility, to traffic, to, by the way, where's the money being spent? How is the money being spent? Why is the money being spent? I thought FIFA had all the money in the world. They have billions of dollars in sponsorships. We're still putting up money to have the privilege for this. So there's a lot coming, Victor. I want to end on a positive note. I'll give you the last word for tonight as we wrap up. But also, Victor, any questions or comments from fans? And you're closer to the details. I know we've had a few people watching. We appreciate everyone that's tuned in and at least heard us for a second or two. And this will live on in infamy, I guess, for better or worse, Victor. But any questions or comments or just shout-outs, we'd appreciate that. And I'll let you close, Victor.
Yeah, we have over on YouTube, we have Hector Flores chiming in. Sent us a couple questions here.
Hector, hit it.
But I'll go through these.
Okay.
Thoughts on non-traditional media like YouTubers and podcasters? Can that be a resource? And as an example, the Dynamo Fan TV or Foxtrot, which they cover the Houston Dynamo. Look, I think there's space for different types of media outlets. I don't think you certainly without some of these fan blogs, which I call them that, not in a demeaning way. I think that's kind of the category they fall in. That's again, serves a certain purpose. I think that especially with digital media now, you're going to have a lot of these fans pages. I like anybody. I think it's fair to give them a seat at the table. Sometimes they'll ask tough questions. Sometimes they may not. Sometimes they may be fluff. But I think, again, it's just when you have just them asking questions, and you ask yourself, well, where's the rest of, traditional media? And sometimes, these blogs exist. And I'm sure because, as a freelancer, I've not so much fan blogs, but smaller outlets, right?
Sure.
It's because of the lack of coverage. And because sometimes a lot of it stems from the passion, all these podcasts of just wanting to have coverage and saying, okay, well, maybe I'm not the best at it, but I'll give it a shot because there's nothing out there.
And that's very valid, Victor. I'm going to interrupt you because I do want to chime in on this one. I am grateful for anyone that's covering the sport, Victor, because there just isn't. The traditional outlets don't do it. And again, maybe you have to go back to newsrooms. You have to go back to sales meetings with general managers where they're outlining what is going to bring them in revenue. And I get it. Maybe soccer isn't it yet. And that speaks of where we are with soccer. But I see, Victor, so many people that sacrifice of their time, that sacrifice of their resources, that probably have their significant other, their partner, mad at them because they should be at home when they are covering games. And I'm sure the answer they're getting, because I've gotten it, is, oh, by the way, you're not getting paid for that, right? And I bet that's the situation for many. I'm grateful for the commitment that people have to get it done. And I like the proliferation of technology. Victor, we're certainly not ABC 13. We're certainly not Fox 26. But technology has allowed us to be able to get the word out. So I'm happy about that piece of it, where in the past there was 3 channels, 1 newspaper, and they monopolized coverage. That's the way it was. If you wanted to break in, that was the way to do it. So I am grateful about the smaller outfits like ourselves who are out there and trying. I think the balance, Victor, is how can we grow? How can we get more viewers and followers? I think maybe my response to that is, let's help each other out, right, Victor? We have to be supportive of each other. It doesn't mean we can't ask the hard questions. It doesn't mean we're not exploring the story behind. And I think where we have to also work on, Victor, and I've lived this in Spanish language media, that everything goes to the lowest bidder. And the lowest bidder is willing to do it for nothing. And when you get to that point, then there is no business and there won't be business. And that's a whole topic for another day on Spanish language, Victor. But when someone does coverage or does a production because they're lucky to get a media pass, to me, it's not enough. And I'm going to stop there for now, Victor. Any other questions or comments, Victor?
No, I think that's all we had. Also asked if will there be coverage at the Chivas America game? I don't know if it's just in general. I'm sure there'll be outlets out there. If he's talking about us, I think we'll try to have something from out there as well.
Why not? So, Victor, as we close today, first of all, we're grateful to all of you that follow us, that take the time to help us better understand this world we live in relative to soccer, to the coverage. What are your expectations, Victor, as we start this journey with the Soccer Tejas podcast?
More than anything, just try to give a voice to the game. Most levels of the game, the different voices of our game, whether it's the general public, whether it's the people making the decisions, whether it's other voices in the media, and gives us a better outlook, a different view sometimes of how they see things. I think that's what we want to be. We want to just increase the coverage of soccer in our great state.
We do. Victor, it's always an honor. It's great to be with you on this, I guess, official 3rd episode. More of an editorial episode today, by the way, friends. So we appreciate you being a part of this. We're missing Laura Gomez, but before we go, thanks to Victor, thanks to Laura, thanks to all our production staff, and mainly, like I say this, hopefully with all our broadcasts, thanks to you, friends, who take the time to follow us, to listen, to be critical of us as well. We're not perfect. We don't pretend to be perfect, but we do appreciate you following us and you being a part of our life. So until next time, we bid you adieu, goodbye, adios, on this latest edition of the Soccer Tejas Podcast.